Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. This course is about formal semantics. So it is we'll see what semantics is. The word formal already suggests that it's going to be somehow mathematical. What I mean by that is somehow formal, so it will have a lot of symbols and operations and all that stuff. And we start today, and in the beginning we'll see a bit of history and also a bit of philosophy, and we can understand that formal semantics is not a homogeneous monolithic thing. It is very, very heterogeneous, but still so it is actually it's an interaction between mathematics, philosophy, logic, and definitely linguistics. So many disciplines come together to, and not just that, so there are so many other tools that are taken from here and there. So then we have this discipline called formal semantics, and we shall see a little bit of history of this discipline in the beginning. So we shall first see what semantics is. We want to sort of locate semantics in the map of linguistics. So the core areas of linguistics are phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. We know that. Very roughly, we need to understand a bit of all these four, because somehow all these will be there, but for us this is going to be our central topic, and this is going to be almost central to everything. These two are also very important, but need not be important all the time. Now, phonology. It studies the speech sounds of a language. It is based on phonetics, which is the study of general speech sounds and their production. Phonology also studies the rules for combining speech sounds. For example, when you have in English hit you, because you is palatal, the production does not have any T, it becomes hit you, right? So this thing is pronounced as ch, kind of hit you. So this is a phonological rule. It is based on some phonetic principle, so it is basically palatalization. All these processes, so not only the speech sounds of a language are studied by a phonologist, also these changes, these conversions, changes, transformations, all these things are studied in phonology. Then we go to the next, we have morphology. This actually studies morphemes. What is a morpheme? A morpheme, not just morphemes, it studies two things: morphemes and their relations. That is, when two or more morphemes come together to make a word and all that stuff. A morpheme is a minimum meaningful unit. Thus, the word men, you can see that men is one word, but it is not one unit. Actually, it is two units. It has got two morphemes, namely man and the English plural morpheme. The question is, how do they unite and make the word men? Not that all the time when suppose two morphemes come together to make one word. Not that all the time they are explicit. Not that all the time you can see both. So there are zero modification cases also. For example, I give you just one. So I just say that John saw Tom and John saw him. Now look at the difference. Here him, it is clearly he plus the accusative, English accusative case, right, which makes it he, and this, that makes it him. Here also it is there, but it is there as 0 modification. It does not modify Tom physically, but still it is there. So, when we consider this case, we cannot say it is just bare minimum Tom or it is just naked Tom. It is Tom plus something, the accusative marker, which is not visible, but which is there. All these things are studied in morphology. And syntax anyway will have a detailed consideration, will have a detailed session on syntax, which basically will be based on Chomsky's syntactic structures. So, it is the study of the concatenation of words. When words combine, when words are combined together to make phrases and sentences, how do so the rules of combinations, those rules are studied by a syntactician. The main question, how are the grammatical sentences and phrases made, and how are they different from non-grammatical phrases and sentences. Finally, we will talk about semantics. Roughly speaking, this is the study of the meaning of a linguistic expression. Some very important questions: what is the meaning of the proper noun Montague? What is the meaning of a common noun like man? What is the meaning of a verb such as goes? What is the meaning of the sentence Montague goes there? So, meaning is the most important concern for semantics. So, here is a dictionary definition, or rather an encyclopedic definition of it. It is there in Encyclopedia Britannica. Semantics is the philosophical and scientific study of meaning in natural and artificial languages. So, we also in our ordinary lives we do some semantics. For example, when we talk about synonymy or we talk about synonymies, for example, there are two phrases are synonymous when they have the same meaning. For example, unmarried man and bachelor, they are synonyms. And there are many such things, many such meaning relations, and antonyms are opposed to each other as far as meanings are concerned. So, we already we deal with a lot of semantics in our everyday life. We shall now see what semantics was before Montague, before Richard Montague, the man who pioneered the discipline we are going to see, that is Montague semantics. It is called Montague semantics. So, we will see different attitudes in the study of semantics. First of all, it is the referential theory. This is definitely the oldest theory, and in the Western academia and Western philosophy, basically Plato puts it this way in his Cratylus. He says that the meaning of a word is whatever it refers to. For example, I just say Athens, it directly refers to a place. So, so the point is, a word, the meaning of a word is an object, but this is not a very easy position to maintain. Why not? Because I understand that the meaning of London or Athens is an object, or the meaning of something else, sun or moon, all these words, the meanings of these are very clear. But what about goes, for example? What about good? What about bad? So, it is not a very, at least the way it comes to us is not very clear. Then we see modified versions of this theory. One such is Mill's theory. So, he wrote a very famous book called John Stuart Mill. He wrote a very famous book called System of Logic. In that, he talks about connotation and denotation. Even in the naive language, non-technical language, people talk about connotation and denotation, but they don't mean the same thing as the philosopher means by this dichotomy, connotation and denotation. Basically, connotation is something associated with a word. It is a guide. It is a guide that leads us to its denotation. For example, when somebody says cat, something happens to me some, I'm guided in a certain way, and as a result of that I can categorize an animal as a cat. So that associated thing is connotation. And what is denotation? Denotation is a cat, right, an object. So that we can understand very easily. So, but the problem is what kind of a thing connotation is. This is not a very easy question. Some people said it was a mental object, some people said no, it was not mental, it was real, but it was anyway problematic. Mill also said some very curious things. For example, he was of the opinion, I am not going to support or deny what he said, I am just mentioning what he said. For example, he said that proper nouns like John or Tom or Ram are not connotative, they are denotative. What does that mean? They refer to something, yes, but they do not have any meaning because they do not have any connotation. So, for example, I can name my son anything. I can name my ugly son beauty. I can do anything, right? So it doesn't mean that the meaning, or my daughter who never wins a game, I can name my daughter Victoria, which means that somebody who has victory, but she never saw victory in life. Even then I call her Victoria. So the connotation of victory has nothing to do with the object that is in this case Victoria. So proper nouns according to Mill were just denotating. But this referential theory, so what is the basis of it? So the main point is there is a word, and then the meaning of that. So the first version is directly, it is an object, and the modified version there is a word, and so there are two different things. Sometimes through the connotation of it, it chooses an object as a denotation, or sometimes it directly chooses an object. And so these are non-connotative, these are the non-connotative types, and this is the connotative type. So this is roughly the referential theory. I don't claim that these are sort of technically correct definitions, but these are just very rough ideas. So then we go to the next one, the ideational theory. We understand that meanings seem to have, or linguistic elements, expressions seem to have kind of mental things. At least they seem to be mental. Why? Because some understanding is all the time involved in the case of meaning. We understand meaning, meanings are there in our understanding, right? So that is the reason many philosophers and thinkers thought that meanings were mental elements. So for example, John Locke, the British empiricist, Locke claimed that meanings are ideas associated with a word. So when I say something as a speaker, I encode the idea in a word, and then because we have some shared knowledge, some common knowledge, it can be decoded by my hearer. So but primarily meanings are not. So this is non-referential, because the whole dimension here, the whole focus is different, right? The focus is, yes, meanings are basically ideas associated with words, they are not objects. So that is why it is called the ideational theory. And then another very dramatically different theory, different from the last two. This is the behaviorist theory. What is that? So it was pioneered by structuralists like Bloomfield, who did great things in the field of linguistics, and B.F. Skinner. We just take something by Skinner. This is a quote from Encyclopedia Britannica once again. Now I just read it out and then we try to understand what it says. The meaning of an expression as uttered on a particular occasion is either 1. The behavioral stimulus that produces the utterance, 2. The behavioral response that the utterance produces, or 3. A combination of both. Thus, the meaning of fire as uttered on a particular occasion might include running or calling for help. But even on a single occasion, it is possible that not everyone who hears fire will respond by running or calling for help. So, the point is, what is the meaning? It is whatever stimulates me to say the word, or whatever comes out as the consequence of the consequence of hearing the word. That is the meaning of it. That is practically what I do, how I react to some word, or how I accept it, or under which situation, the situation under which I pronounce it. So, that very thing, my behavior would be the meaning of the word. There is nothing more than that. Both with the ideational theory and the behaviorist theory, there is a common problem. They cannot perhaps explain the fact that words unite with each other to make sentences, and there is kind of a composition, right? There are rules, and not only that, also we must notice that the meanings also unite to give the meaning of the sentence. This part is so how ideas, so there is as far as we know, there is no rule book for combining ideas, or there is no rule book for combining stimuli or responses, right? So, that would be difficult. Now, when these things were going on, a great mathematician or philosopher called Frigger came up with a wonderful theory which we shall discuss in details. But anyways, the whole picture changed when Frigger started working on all these theories, and he came up with a very different idea about semantics. Now, we shall go through a very short tour, a historical tour. We will try to see what formal semantics is. So, it is a brief historical sketch. Roughly speaking, formal semantics studies meanings of linguistic expressions such as words, phrases and sentences. Now, very important, look at the word formal. It is a set of formal systems. We will study formal systems in the second session. This discipline is pioneered by Richard Montague. His date is 1930 to 1971. He died at the age of, before it was, this discipline was called formal semantics, it was called Montague grammar. So, then we will see the evolution of it. So, here is a very short history of its development. So, we start with the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Already we mentioned Plato, his Cratylus and his theory of reference, but here, as I said, that semantics has been a part of traditional linguistics. It can be described as a monolithic thing somehow, but definitely formal semantics is not monolithic. So, we need to talk about different disciplines, so and different thinkers, they come from different fields and all that stuff. We start with Aristotle, who for the first time in the Western philosophy talked about logic and semantics, and he was the pioneer of Western logic, and for nearly 2000 years what people understood as logic was only Aristotelian logic. So, definitely we need to talk about him. According to him, meanings are of several types. So, mainly they are of two types. So, that is one typology. So, a simple form and a composite form. So, for example, man is a simple form, but when you have a man runs, it is a composite form. Only a composite form can be true or false. You can see already he has kind of an understanding of what we now call a proposition, and we'll talk about propositions and statements and all that stuff, but he understands that man is neither true nor false, runs is neither true nor false. When they unite, when they come together, you get something which is entitled to have a truth value. So, basically a statement is something which is entitled to have a truth value. So, already this composite form is kind of a primitive statement. Aristotle believed there were 10 categories such as substance, quality, quantity, space, time, etc. These are the meanings of simple forms. So, the entire Aristotelian philosophy in a sense is based on this kind of categoriology, this kind of typology of elements, and we can see that it was somehow semantic, not that it was very strictly semantic all the time. Sometimes it seems to be, the typology seems to be slightly confused and all that stuff, but despite all odds and everything, we can see that it is mostly semantic. Now, it will not be irrelevant to say that this kind of semantic typology was a very important tool in the history of philosophy. So, as far as we know, there are two civilizations that somehow developed logic, not the same logic, two different logics, the Greeks and the Indians. But across cultures, we can see that this linguistic or semantic typology as a basis for philosophical understanding is common. We can also see the same tendency in Indian philosophy, especially in Vaishyashika philosophy. Vaishyashikas are the physicists in some sense. So, they talk about objects. So, for them it is very important to also at the same time classify objects. So, they believe in 7 categories which they call padarthas, and we will see once again it is a semantic typology. It comes directly from the grammarian. So, the Sanskrit grammarians said that there were words of 4 types: words denoting substances, words denoting attributes, words denoting actions, and words denoting universals. So, in Sanskrit, substance dravya, attribute guna, action karma, and universal samanya or jati. So, you get 4 categories. I am talking about the 7 categories of the Vaishyashikas. So, you get 4 from these 4, which directly come from the grammarians. Then you have the negative words. For example, he is non-human, or something is immortal, not mortal. So, you find this im or non, that is a negative particle. Also, you find something like he is not moving, which means that he has the absence of movement. All these negative words, negative expressions could mean one thing, that is absence, which is another category which could be understood as the 5th category or whatever. Then how come we have 7 categories? There are two more which we require. The unique particular, which the Vaishyashikas called Vishesha. That is the reason the whole philosophy is called Vaishyashika philosophy. This is very tightly associated with the Vaishyashika theory of atoms. We know that Vaishyashikas are the first atomists, perhaps way before anybody else talked about atoms. Vaishyashikas did. So, an atom must have a Vishesha. We are not talking about this. So, it is very important for them to have this, otherwise the other categories cannot be supported. And then inherence. So, you have a substance, for example, say a box. and you have an attribute, say its color, suppose it's a red box. Now the point is, how does the red color how does the red color get related to this box? For this they have to invent kind of a different category which they call inherence. So the red color resides in the box through inherence. So you can see that these two, the unique particular and the inherence, are kind of supportive categories. So that is how you have 7 categories of the Vaishyashikas, and you can clearly see that it is based on kind of a semantic classification. And then they would do logic. So in fact the early logicians of India would merge. So as a school, logicians merged with Vaishyashikas to make kind of a scientific school, kind of a school that would talk about things through debating, which is called Navya Nyaya. And the merging happened sometime in 6th or 7th century AD, and we can see that once again one important basis for that was this semantic classification, which we see the tendency is also seen in the works of Aristotle. Anyways, we get back to Aristotle and his philosophy. Aristotle analyzed a declarative sentence such as Socrates is mortal, or all men are mortal, or no man is mortal. Like, we are taking all declarative sentences into 2 parts: Socrates, or all men, these are subjects, and mortal, that is the predicate. He called is or are the copula. So a subject gets related or gets glued with a predicate through the copula. That was Aristotle's idea. And then we skip a few centuries, in fact quite a few centuries, and we come to this time, 1596, 1650. René Descartes, the French philosopher, scientist, mathematician, he believed that a universal language called lingua universalis underlie all the speech. This structure represented the human reason. So in a sense, if you wanted to represent human reason, you would have to do that through this lingua universalis. Otherwise, because reason is not tied up to a specific language or a culture, so in that case, but at the same time, reason must be represented. If I want to explicitly represent reason, I need elements that are linguistic. Otherwise, how do I represent it at all? So what would be the language of reason? So it would be this lingua universalis, and that language must underlie all human languages. This was a Cartesian assumption. And then following Descartes, Leibniz said that he also believed in Leibniz, the German philosopher who invented calculus. Today's calculus actually is his brainchild. He did a lot other things. He was a great physicist, definitely a philosopher, a mathematician, a very great thinker. He believed in the Cartesian dream, the dream of lingua universalis. So this was his dissertation. So it's called Dissertatio de Arte Combinatoria. It's the art of combination, and in this was his research dissertation. He called the general framework for such a universal language characteristica universalis. The framework would contain simple signs for simple concepts and ars combinatoria, or the art of combination, for combining those simple signs and for building complex signs that would stand for complex ideas. Also, the framework should have the proper analysis of such combinations. So not only does it have signs like alpha, beta, gamma and stuff, also it has rules for combining those things and making a structure like alpha, beta. That is actually arte combinatoria. So, the art of combination, how do I combine? Not that every combination is a good combination. For example, you can see in an ordinary language, when if I say that I are sleeping, definitely you will tell me that this is a bad combination, I and are. Why bad? You need a lot of theories to say that, but the point is this is a bad combination. So, not that every combination of signs is okay. So, the combination must be rule bound. What are the rules? So, the Leibnizian characteristic universals will have to have the rules for combination. And then comes Frigger. You can consider him the central figure as far as formal semantics or modern semantics is concerned. Montague borrowed so much from him. In fact, the entire semantic model Montague built is based on Frigger's principle of compositionality, which we are going to discuss in detail. Frigger rejected the Aristotelian analysis of a sentence. We will talk about that, why he rejected. For him, a sentence has mainly two parts, namely proper names that are saturated and unsaturated concept words. In a sentence like all men are mortal, both men and mortal are concept words, whereas Socrates is a proper name in a sentence such as Socrates is a man. So, look, the very analysis, the very equation, that the very effort that equated all men and Socrates would then be wrong. Why? Because Socrates is saturated. So, we will understand, we will study the very idea of saturation in the second or third session maybe. But here you already find an unsaturated thing, that is man. For example, how do I know? I can say Socrates is a man. So, something is a man. You see, when I say Socrates, you feel fine Socrates, but I cannot say man, right? That is unsaturated. So, when man and Socrates unite, so in a sense you have a complete structure, but Socrates is in a sense complete in itself, whereas man is not, or is a man is definitely not saturated. We will talk about it later. And then, according to him, Frigger, every linguistic expression expresses a sense and refers to a reference. So, this is in a sense it is getting back to the old referential theory, but it is far more complex than any referential theory people saw before. So, thus the expression the morning star expresses some sense that leads one to its reference, which is the planet Venus. So, the sense is kind of a path which leads one to a destination, and that is the reference. So, so meaning now once again is not a unit. So, for Frigger, meaning has at least two different aspects. One, the path through which one is led to the reference, the object. Frigger famously demonstrated that the reference of a proper name was an object, and that of a concept word was a function. What I mean by a function is a mathematical function. Frigger was a mathematician. Finally, the reference of a declarative sentence was a truth value. A truth value is either 1 or 0. 1 means true and 0 means false. Many of his ideas would eventually be absolutely central to formal semantics. Frigger was the first person to remove a lot of confusions as far as meaning is concerned. Because before that, some people thought meanings were ideational things. These are ideas, but ideas are subjective things. At the same time, we cannot deny that there is some mental object associated, some mental element or some mental side to linguistic understanding. What is it? If I do not know English, there is no point in telling me something in English. I understand when somebody says that there is a dog on the street. I understand if I understand English. Now the point is, what is this understanding? So we understand. Is it what is meaning? Is it the thing we understand, or is it the thing that is out there on the street? The meaning is, in a sense, both. So as far as the understanding part is concerned, it is the sense, and as far as the thing out there is concerned, it is the reference. This is how it has got two parts. And now Frigger for the first time said even sense, although it looks mental, even this is not ideational. This is not, somehow it has nothing to do with somebody's personal idea or something like that. This is not subjective. This is also objective. For example, he here uses his famous telescope analogy. He says that the moon is seen through a telescope, right? Now, when you see the moon through a telescope, from one angle you have one picture or one image formed in your telescope, right? One image of the moon, and that will not vary. But so that is objective, but you have to see that. So you have to have access to that image already formed. In that sense, both sense and reference associated with a word are objective. So there is no subjective personal element. That is how he was very much against any psychologistic idea. So the meaning, either sense or reference of a word, the meaning is not like pain or pleasure, which are subjective. So this is one thing Frigger clarifies. We'll see that anyway. So he comes up with a rigorous system of logic, and he, in true sense, is the pioneer of modern logic. This system he called Konzeptskript, in German Begriffsschrift. It is a formal system that contains logical constants such as and, or, etc., quantifiers such as all and some, and signs for concepts and objects. His notation was very complicated. So after Frege worked on this Begriffsschrift, Russell came up with another rigorous logical text, both Russell and Whitehead, in fact, and it is called the Principia Mathematica. It represented a full-fledged formal logical system that was mathematically rigorous with a simpler notation. The great works by Tarski, Wittgenstein, and other logicians, mathematicians, made formal logic an independent discipline in the first half of the 20th century. The Cartesian dream about lingua universalis came true when Noam Chomsky started his cognitive revolution in 1950s and 60s. He talked about the universal grammar. So the moment you talk about the universal grammar, you assume that yes, there is some kind of lingua universalis. Chomsky introduced the formal system to the study of language. For the first time, linguistics became formal in the true sense. We'll explore the meaning of this word formal anyway in the very second session of this course. Logicians such as Russell and Strawson claimed that there was no exact logic in the natural language. Now we are slowly going towards formal semantics. Now here is a negative point. Although Russell and Strawson, these very great logicians, they believe that if you want to do scientific things, you need a flawless, perfect language. But natural language, any natural language is flawed. Why? Because they can be ambiguous. What is ambiguity? For example, when I say that stout major's wife, the structure is ambiguous because it can either mean the major is stout and his wife, or it can mean that it can mean that Major's wife and that wife is stout, right. So, we can see that this is structurally ambiguous. There are many such ambiguous constructs in our day to day language. So, and there are many other defects of the natural language. Therefore, the techniques of logic could not be used for studying the structure of natural languages. And in his syntactic structures, Chomsky too expressed his doubts about connecting syntax to semantics through a rigorous formal system. Although Chomsky believed in the universal grammar, also he believed in lingua universalis, he could not really have much trust in a formal system of semantics. So, it is because everybody doubted the meaning part of natural language. The structural part now would be perfect with the works of Chomsky, it will be perfected rather. Finally, Montague's famous paper, The Proper Treatment of Quantification in Ordinary English, established a formal semantic system. When these great logicians like like Russell and Strawson were against doing natural language semantics or against formalizing semantics, Montague was a student. As I said, he was born in 1930, and he first had a BA in philosophy, and then he had an MA in mathematics, and then he graduated with a PhD degree. In the year 1957, he worked with a great logician, Chomsky, whose works are also very, very important for any, almost central to any logical system, and absolutely important for any formal semantic system. So, and then Montague started teaching at UCLA, and then he taught there till his death. So, he was not very happy with the idea that nobody could do any serious, any rigorous stuff, any formal stuff through natural language. So, what was the point? Russell's point was, or these logicians' point was, that you couldn't formalize the meaning part of language. Already its structure was somehow formalized by Chomsky. We will see that in our third session, how the structure of the syntactic structure of languages, natural languages, was sort of formalized, but then the meaning part could not be formalized. So to say, in a sense, the logicians like Russell and Strawson thought that artificial languages have a structure, but no such structure could be imposed on natural languages. They are different. They don't have any specific structure. So, so they said that they thought that natural languages were messy. No exact logic could ever understand it. But in Universal Grammar, which was published in 1970, Montague famously claimed, "There is, in my opinion, no important theoretical difference between natural languages and the artificial languages of logicians. Indeed, I consider it possible to comprehend the syntax and semantics of both kinds of languages with a single natural and mathematically precise theory." This was the central point of his works, especially his PTQ. The name of that is The Proper Treatment of Quantification in Ordinary English. He created kind of a homomorphism. He showed that some structure, suppose S1, exists in an artificial language. So, and then a counterpart of that would also exist in a natural language. So, almost the same structure would capture both a natural language and an artificial language, and a natural language is as systematic as an artificial language. So, much of this thing what I said is taken from this. Actually, it is a presentation by Professor Barber Patti, and it has very important information about the history of semantics. Well, then when all these things were happening, there was somebody called Professor Bar Hillel, or I am not very sure of my pronunciation of it, who kept saying, he was insistent, he kept saying that natural language is all fine. I believe that something can be done. I believe that you can discover the perfect logic of natural language, but nobody listened to him. So, in a sense, Bar Hillel approached Montague. He kept saying, Montague was a student that time, he kept saying that you may try to do something in that field. And finally, Montague came up with his PTQ and with his universal grammar, and with practically with many other works, and those works together established the new discipline called formal semantics. Then we will see, okay, the entire course will be based on this book. It is our textbook, Introduction to Montague Semantics by Doughty, Wall and Peters, 1981. This is a book that helps us understand Montague's PTQ. It is technical, but it has a wonderful pedagogy. So, it will guide us through a wonderfully designed path, and our journey will be guided by this. Now, the topics covered. We start with formal systems, because we are talking about formal semantics. What is a formal system? As this is an introductory class, I should introduce all these words at least, and then we have the detailed understanding of that. So, a formal system is based on some primitive symbols like S1, S2, whatever, and rules for combinations. Any formal system would have that principle. By doing that, it does two things. One, it combines some things and it blocks some constructions. So, so the agenda is to make the desired constructions, to cook up the desired constructions, and to block the undesired constructions. For example, a formal grammar would allow, or would help me cook up a sentence like John is wise. There would be rules for cooking up this sentence, but the same grammar also must block a construction like John are wise, right? This should be blocked. So, this it has got this twofold agenda. Then we shall study formal syntax, and here this will be based on, this session will be based on syntactic structure of Chomsky, and then we will do formal logic. I will mention the textbooks whenever we do something. After that, we need to understand, we need to have very basic understanding of set theory and functions. So, the mathematical theories about sets and functions we need to do. I will try to start it from the scratch, and I think it will be pretty easy. And then a very important section, Frigger's philosophy of language. Already I mentioned sense and reference, and most importantly his compositionality principle, that the reference of a concept word. So, for example, when you say that Socrates is a man in a symbolic form ms, the reference of man is actually a function, and the reference of Socrates is somebody, whoever it is. And what actually happens is it's an entity. This function takes this entity and yields a truth value. Because Socrates is a man, somehow the function, within the structure of the function, Socrates is actually mapped to 1, and then when Socrates joins man, 1 is yielded as the truth value. So, this is precisely his compositionality principle. So, the entire, so this is the arte combinatoria Leibniz talked about. So, this is a vivid and rigorous arte combinatoria in that sense, in the Leibnizian sense. After having done the foundational things, I think there would be something like 6 sessions on the foundational things. After having covered the foundational things, we will go to the real part, the central part of it, propositional semantics. Now, also we have to do propositional logic, formal logic. We will do propositional logic and also predicate logic. Bit of it we will see some deduction, some rule and stuff like that, and then we will do propositional semantics. So, here in propositional semantics, we will consider, for example, sentence variables and sentence constants. So, like P, Q, we are not going to split P and Q, and then our most important things will be the things like the logical operators like and, or, if, then, not, and all that stuff, and their combinations. So, it is very important to see the homomorphism Montague all the time talked about. What is it? That is the reason every model has got 2 versions, the artificial version and the language version. So, L0 is the artificial version. It is a constructed, it is an artificial language, and L0E is like English. It is not exactly English, but it is pretty much like English. The same applies to this predicate semantics. In predicate semantics, we will split, will peep into the very structure of a sentence P and that of a sentence Q. We analyze a sentence. For example, take Socrates is a man. In this model, that is the propositional model, it will be represented just as P. But in predicate semantics, we split it into M and S. Or, for example, if I want to say that a man exists, we would split this, the whole idea, as there exists an X such that X is a man. So, this splitting is done by predicate semantics or predicate logic. Once again, it will have 2 versions. Why 2 versions? So, L0, it will have certain rules, R1 through Rn, and this L0E also will have some rules, say for example, S1 through Sn. We will see that the structure of these rules is not very different from the structure of these rules. So, there is kind of a homomorphism. Essentially, they are the same thing, only there are cosmetic differences here and there. This will fulfill the Montaguean idea that there is no significant theoretical difference between the formal and the natural language. And then, so we have once again L1 and L1E. So, this will be pretty central. So, we will have something like 7 sessions on propositional and predicate semantics, and then we will go to a higher order predicate semantics. Why higher order? Because in predicate semantics, so many things cannot be defined and it's a first order predicate semantics. Then we go to higher order predicate semantics, which is once again predicate semantics, but in this you can do a lot more than you could do in the previous languages. So the first one is L type. This is based on Russell's type theory. So here is a language based on Russell's type theory. We learn Russell's type theory, and then we'll also study the language called L type. And L type also has two versions, one artificial, and then we'll use that artificial style, artificial construction for understanding a natural language which is pretty much like English. Then we'll have to study lambda calculus, which is a mathematical tool invented by Alonzo Church in 1930s, early 1930s. And there is a language called L lambda, which is based on this lambda calculus. So we need to learn this the lambda calculus for doing L lambda. And finally we'll do intentional semantics. What is meant by that? So far, like in all these things, so intentional semantics will probably have 1 or 2 sessions, and what will be covered there, as I was trying to say, that this was the understanding of meaning as the reference. For example, if you take MS, that is Socrates is a man, M will be kind of a set of men and Socrates will be an entity. So MS will relate this entity to this set, right. So both are things out there, but we did not talk about in all these sessions, we will not talk about for example, how I am guided to choose one set out of many when somebody says man, right. So that thing which is somehow mental, I am not saying that is psychological, I am not saying that is subjective, it is objective, but somehow it is mental because my understanding is somehow involved in it. So this part is the intention of a word. It is kind of connotation. Connotation is very primitive intention. So it has, there will be 3 parts there. One, tense operators. So we need to distinguish sentences like I go and I went. So we need tense operators for that. And modal operators, which are basically 2. There is no point in talking about modal operators right now, anyway we will do. And finally intentional logic, which will talk about the grand program of Frigger and how it could be formalized. So in the foundational sessions we will see the Frigger ideas, and in this session we will see the formalization of those ideas. So almost everything will have 2 different aspects, a theoretical aspect which will be covered in the beginning, and then a symbolic formal aspect which will be covered towards the end. So this is how we will have roughly 20 classes, and that's how we will try to understand formal semantics. Thank you.